their website, so I'm really excited about that. Okay, cool. So my name is Richard Rachman. I'm the Biodiversity Coordinator for the Institute for Sustainability at Cal State Northridge. Um, I'm interested in biodiversity on an urban level and throughout the state of California as well. So I'm in the Schiffman lab at Cal State Northridge where I study plant ecology. Specifically, I'm looking at oak trees right now. Today, I'm going to talk about kind of my last month focusing on native plants and why they're so important for the environment. So I'm going to walk through this with kind of a typical way that scientific research is done. It's an atypical scientific presentation, but I really strongly believe in the scientific process, and I try to incorporate that into a lot of my public work as well. So I'm going to go through the introduction, kind of the meat and bones behind this project, some of the methods of what I did, the results of what I found. I'll discuss some of what I found, and then I'll make some concluding remarks as well. And a lot of this is going to be intermixed with each other, like some background information in the results and the discussion and conclusion kind of mixed together. So this is just more or less a template. The plant you see to the right on the screen, and that was in a lot of the promotional material, this is Theodore Payne's lupin, or Lupinus payneii. This plant was found it's very local to the San Fernando Valley, to Northridge, where I am right now. And I found this plant in Moore Park. And this plant was discovered somewhat recently, within the last few decades, cryptically, right? So the genetics of this plant identified it as a species, but we only found that after looking at the genetics, right? Looking at the genomic data. And we found that this very particular species is very restricted in its range, and it needs a lot of help, right? So I'll talk about a few like locally rare plants in this area, in addition to some more common things that we should all be interested in. Okay, so what's a native plant, right? Super basic. This plant that I'm showing here is a Catalina island mariposa lily, which is also a somewhat rare plant in the state of California with protected status, Calochortus catalinae. And here, I just love this because it just summarizes what native plants are to me. Native plants are indigenous to the state of California, and they are just a part of the biodiversity, a part of the ecology of the state. Here you have longhorned bees, probably males, that are nesting within this, or sleeping and resting in this flower, waiting for a female to come. And then you have like a crab spider that's just waiting for like maybe a pollinator that's like more its size that it can try to attack and eat. And native plants just provide sustenance and habitat for animals that so much of the public is so interested in, right? Plants have their own merit and their own importance, but they're also important for the animals that we love and care for as well, especially pollinators, right? So why native? Why native plants? Why not landscaping? Why not non-natives from Europe or South Africa or South America? Identity. So here's one of my favorite plants, and it was the first slide as well. Basin Big Sagebrush Artemisia tridentata, variety of tridentata. This is one of my favorite plants. It's one of the first plants that I started working on when I was doing dendrochronology on sagebrush in Owens Valley. So many Californians, they grow up not understanding what it means to be Californian, what it looks like to be Californian. We think eucalyptus, we think citrus, we think palm trees when we think of California, right? When anyone shows LA, the first thing they show is a giant fan palm of some sort. And yes, there are fan palms that are native to California, one, maybe two, but so many of them are brought from other parts of the world that we don't really acknowledge the chaparral. We don't really acknowledge the coastal sage scrub. We don't acknowledge the oak woodlands. So much of our identity as Californians is attached to plants that don't even really belong here. They were imposed upon this landscape by colonialists. So one reason native plants are so important is to give the next generation an identity of what Californians look like. I was hiking with my brother yesterday, and he was smelling sagebrush, and he's like, this is what my childhood smells like. He didn't even know like it was a native. Like he had no idea. Like I don't really get to talk to my family about like what I do and what I'm interested in, right? But like that came out of his own mouth. Like that smell associated with those memories. And that's why I'm interested in natives, and that's why I hope everyone else is as well. Decolonization, giving the land back to the inhabitants that originally lived here. California was inhabited for thousands upon thousands of years by indigenous people, and so much of their livelihoods depended on native plants, right, that provided for thousands of people. So part of how we can decolonize our lives, how we can be involved in indigenous movements, is by being involved in native plants and giving credit to their indigenous knowledge as well. So that's if that's not a big enough reason to be involved in native plants, I don't know what is. Biodiversity, right? So here's an endangered Calochortus. This is Alkali mariposa lily, Calochortus striatus, and there's this really pretty marine blue butterfly in it. Native plants support more birds. Native plants support more insects, which then support more birds, even to that. And then birds and plants and insects can also support more mammals as well, and amphibians and reptiles as well. So when you turn your backyard into a little, preserve, nature preserve, right? You're contributing to biodiversity in your neighborhood. Like even if on a small scale, and it's super powerful, right? There are some non-native trees that can increase biodiversity as well, but they pale in comparison to native trees, native shrubs, native flowers, native grasses. So you really want to see more birds, you want to see more insects, plant more natives in your yard. I'm just going to throw some numbers at you. This is a lot. So California has approximately 6,500 native species, varieties, and subspecies. We also have about 183 federally endangered plants in California. Those are like plants that are federally listed. And so we live in Los Angeles. We have this habitat near us called coastal sage scrub. And it's really a unique, beautiful ecosystem, really smells strong. Sparse shrubs intermixed with grasses and forbs and stuff. And approximately every year we lose 117 square kilometers of coastal sage scrub. And 85% of it is gone forever. Like it has been developed and is just now concrete jungle. So this is bad and good. There's a few reasons why it's good. But we can still find those native species in that concrete jungle. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is hope, that we can still find a lot of these native species. And you can be a part of that. You can help, right? You can not only find these native species, but you can help propagate them and encourage them in your yard, right? So what I'm going to be talking about in this talk today is finding natives, planting natives, and give native plants to your community members as well. Okay, so let's talk about like what I did and how I did it, I guess. So this is a sacred thorn apple that I found really close to Cal State Northridge, and there's a hoverfly in it. It's really pretty. I love sacred thorn apple. There's like debate. It's native, but like it's really ubiquitous up throughout the West. But I'm a huge fan of it. It's just a gorgeous flower, and it really likes those disturbed rural conditions, right? Super pretty. So how did I do what I did in the last month involving native plants, right? I look around CSUN, I look around Cal State Northridge. I help others look around their neighborhood for native plants. And then I collected seeds close to Cal State Northridge as well in the habitat that is most similar to what Cal State Northridge might have actually used to look like. So let's ask ourselves, like, how far back should we go when we're looking at a landscape to decide like what native plants belong there and don't belong there, right? So is Northridge the same as it was 1,000 years? Probably not. 200 years ago, again, probably not. 80 years ago, probably not. So what was the landscape like 1,000 years ago around Northridge? What was it like 200 years ago? What was it like 80 years ago? So this is just a super brief history of Southern California and specifically the San Fernando Valley. But a lot of it was this like annual grasslands that were heavily disturbed by grizzly bears and very much managed by the Tatambiam and the Tongva nations, right? So when I say grasslands, they kind of were more like tons of wildflowers were in these spaces, and like there were a few native grasses, but mostly the landscape was dry most of the year. And there's these like ephemeral kind of floods that would occur in some of the San Fernando Valley that would be every decade, every 100 years, and sometimes even every 1,000 years, really bad floods. And they would heavily alter the landscape, right? Pockmarked with gophers and antelope squirrels and ground squirrels, and the grizzly bears would dig giant holes, and there'd be herds of antelope running across, and a lot of the indigenous people would like manage these landscapes and manage these hillsides and hunt in these areas and move, and they're very much, it was very much an ecosystem in flux constantly. So can we get back to that? Probably not, right? And then we had like colonization by the Spaniards, and then we also had like development into these like large housing tracts. Here's like a snippet of what the San Fernando Valley looks like if we like center it around Cal State Northridge, right? So I'm interested in trying to find these native plants that are still here, right? That's what I'm most interested in. So what I do is I live next to Cal State Northridge. I center my efforts around Cal State Northridge. It's my home. So I look for native plants that are around here, not things that people are restoring, not things that people are wanting to plant into the landscape. I'm interested in what's already here, right? And so here's just some of my observations on iNaturalist. iNaturalist is a community science application you can have on your cell phone. You can update a profile and stuff. And this is how I record observations I see. I also utilize CalFlora as well in the connectivity between iNaturalist and CalFlora. So I've observed about 116 species and made about 250 more or less observations of plants. These are just plants. I also observe like insects and animals and stuff. But this is just the plants that I observe. So I've observed in around the Northridge area about 20 native species, right? And some of those are kind of like debatably native, right? Some of them have kind of question marks around them, where you ask some botanists and they're like, oh, that's totally native. And you ask other botanists, they're like, it might be native. Like it's all around the world, right? So it's good news though. Like we do still have native species in Northridge, and they're not just planted by people, right? So here's an example of one place I went to around Cal State Northridge was this abandoned lot that's kind of next to a park on Reseda, and it's got a lot of this like Russian thistle or all this tumbleweed, which is non-native, right, from Eurasia. But no matter what, you look close enough to landscapes, you can find things that will surprise you. I can't promise you'll always find native plants, but you will find things that surprise you. So of course, I found native plants, right? So there's a lot of sacred thornapple on this landscape. It makes sense. It's a ruderal landscape, super like in flux, disturbed. Sacred thornapple does great in these landscapes, and it's thriving here. There's huge populations. I didn't just find sacred thornapple. I also found Pseudonephalium californicum, California pearly everlasting. It's a cool plant. I really like it. It smells like pancakes. It makes me super happy. And I was super happy to find it in this landscape. Another plant I found that won't be surprising to too many people is doveweed, Croton setigerus. Again, another ruderal species, but it's native and it does great in these kind of abused areas. It's super beautiful and it attracts a ton of birds, right? So we know that there's native plants still in these landscapes. And here's a giant one that I found, actually next to Cal State Northridge. This is Isocoma menzicii, coastal goldenrod. So I found this right across from Cal State Northridge, and there's like this weird parking lot structure. It's like not a structure, but it's kind of hard to explain. It's across from student housing. And I found this plant. I've never found anything like this before. Isocoma menzicii has like these serrated teeth on its leaves. I did not find serrations on these leaves. And I ended up telling PPM about this plant, and I've recently gone back to look for more seeds, and most of the plants that I've described to them were destroyed. So that's like really sad, right? Like you find these native plants, local genotypes that are adapted to living in these ecosystems. You tell people about them, and then they get destroyed, right? It's not an endangered plant, so there's not this like, you know, precedent where we have to preserve it or it's gone forever. But it is adapted to that region, so it is of particular interest, and I think it should be of interest to our university as well. Um, so this is my call to arms, that we all need to find these plants before they're gone forever, right? And again, the species is probably fine that you're finding, but what about that local genotype? Or what if it's something like Theodore Payne's bush lupin, where it actually is a unique species, it's just cryptic within the DNA. Like not all species have morphological differences between them. Some of them might be below the surface. So I'm really interested in finding plants within urban landscapes. So I got invited by some environmentalists to go out to Agora Hills to go survey some land that was next to Agora Hills High School. So it's about 4.7 acres that I went out to and surveyed. It had like a pretty strong elevational gradient along it as well. So a lot of me standing on really steep hillsides. And I just do what I do. I just try to observe what I find. Okay, so I worked for about 2 hours. I had the police called on me. They thought I was like some mom that was dropping off their child at the high school thought I was an arsonist. Uh, I talked to the cop. The cop really didn't care I was there and left pretty soon after. I found about 30 plant species. There's probably more. There are some like non-native trees that are like everyone knows are there and they planted there. I did record them, some of the non-native trees, but I was really trying to go after those natives, and I found 13 native species there. And I wrote a report and I gave it off to the environmentalists so they can, and then I also like spoke with the president of the HOA that lives right there. And so my hope is, some of the suggestions I gave them are go back to that spot, save seeds from that area, grow them, like start a little nursery, right? And then try to get the high school involved, right? This needs to be a community effort. You need to contact the science department at that high school. It's right across the street, and get them to be involved in the process. Beforehand, Agora Hills High School wanted to destroy that area and build another parking lot. Why not like educate the next generation of students and get them involved in native plant management and get them involved in land management, right? So some of the species I found were like narrow-leaved milkweed, Asclepias fascicularis. It's super like rural species, loves disturbance. It's cool. It attracts butterflies. Like people, you can tie this species to monarch butterflies, and that really excites people. Toyon, I found within the matrix of like, what's that pine? Aleppo pine, and like, you know, all these like weird landscaping ornamental trees. I found Toyon, which is just this cool chaparral indicative or oak woodland indicative species. I really like it. It gets these like really bright berries in the wintertime, which kind of reminds people in Los Angeles, like, it's Christmas. Like, we don't have snow, but we have Toyon berries. So I love it. I also found chaparral honeysuckle, Linicera subsicata, which again, just really pretty plant. It gets these like bright berries that attract a ton of birds, one of which is peanut peplas. So if you like really pretty birds, really, they have like mohawks and like bright red eyes, and they love this plant, and it's just gorgeous. There's not too many vines in Southern California. There's like Coast Morning Glory, and then you know, wild cucumber. But this is like another one of those vinaceous kind of plants, and it's pretty. So I really believe that these plants need to be in the people's hands. And by that, I mean, like, we could collect these seeds, we could grow these, propagate these plants, and we could put them back on the landscape, right? Or we could like go around and look for baby plants that are growing and then try to protect them with like gopher cages or something so that they can grow big enough and strong enough to feed, you know, deer and foxes and coyotes and rabbits and whatever, but like let's like assist them. Like let's get these landscapes looking more native so they can attract more animals and help the local people more. So these are local plants, local genotypes, like locally adapted, and local people, right? Let's involve community members into this. So then you have to ask yourself, like this HOA, they have like this slope right next to their property. So they benefit from access to those local plants. Where can we get seeds, right? So we're at Cal State Northridge. We have like a few abandoned lots around our property, around the university, and it's not guaranteed people aren't going to destroy those plants, right? Even with the best intentions. How can we get these seeds? How can we ethically source them, right? We don't want to just go to a national forest and start stealing seeds and then ignoring genotypes and ignoring local adaptations and just like and ignoring laws, right? You don't want to like pillage an endangered species and be like, oops, sorry, I didn't know, right? We should do this with the best intentions by the law and for the landscape, like with the best intentions to locally adaptations as well, right? So, but where do we get the seeds? And so that's why I scratch my head. Where in the San Fernando Valley can I get access to the seeds that I could potentially give to students, right? I asked the U.S. Forest Service because of a lot of the wildfires they're dealing with. It's been kind of slow to get a response from them. I wanted to get permission. I wanted to get permitting in order to collect seeds. I don't want to do anything illegally. So, but it was a little too slow with them. So I decided to talk to the Army, specifically the Army Corps of Engineers. So I talked to the biologist with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I was like, hey, I was wondering if I could go to Hansen Dam and I could collect seeds and I could make this webinar and talk about it. And I could grow the seeds and give them to students that live around Northridge for free or for like a low amount of cost, right? And so the Army Corps of Engineers was like, yeah, send us the webinars, write us a report. We're super interested in this. Let's go for it. So I got the Army Corps of Engineers permission. I went to Hansen Dam. I brought another biologist with me, and the two of us collected seeds for Cal State Northridge students. So hopefully soon enough, we can propagate these seeds and give plants to Cal State Northridge students to plant into their yards. So what is the Hansen Dam, right? So the Hansen Dam is one of these really cool remnant habitats of coastal sage scrub, and like the ephemeral wash, like not desert scrub, like scrub wash, and also some really great riparian habitat as well. So it's great for bird watching. There's like hundreds of birds that are observed in this location and thousands of individuals every year. It's an amazing place. If you haven't been, I highly recommend it. So this deserts, I shouldn't say desert, it's definitely not a desert. This scrub habitat is really intact. There's some great native plants there. I was very interested in it. And so I was super glad that we got permission because some of the scrub probably looks really similar to what Northridge used to look like. Not all of it, right? This isn't like, Northridge has a bit of elevational gain, so it's probably different in regards to like a wash, like Koima or Tahunga, right? Those have like decade floods or like 100-year floods or 1,000-year floods that are really severe. So Northridge isn't quite like that, but the precipitation is nearly the same. The annual mean temperature is nearly the same. And if we go back, it's not that far, right? And it's along a really similar watershed as well, right? So yes, this goes from the San Gabriels and stuff, and this Northridge kind of is in between the San Gabriels and the Santa Susanas. The plants are as similar as you're going to get, and it was really hard for me to try to get permission to go into Granada Hills, into a lot of those private areas, and get permission to collect seeds as well. So one of those situations where it's like kind of the best that I can do, and I hope to do better than that into the future as well. So what did I find? A lot of Eriogonum fasciculatum. This is California buckwheat with some Pseudonephalium microcephalum. And it's so cool because like this lizard, this western fence lizard, Scalochortus occidentalis, was just like surfing on top of the buckwheat, eating pollinators. super pretty, super beautiful. I love seeing animals interacting with native plants, and it just makes me excited. That's why I like native plants. So what did the landscape look like, right? So this scrub kind of habitat, you got things like sagebrush, Artemisia californica, you got the Opuntia littoralis, you had our Lord's candle, Hesperoyucca whipplei, a lot of Heterotheca grandiflora. And you can see like Sambucus nigra, or whatever the Sambucus is called these days. That genus is like really changing a lot. Elderberry, you see a lot of elderberry in the landscape, and laurel sumac, and these like really cool forbs that are beautiful in the springtime, but they kind of dry out by like summer, and a lot of those around the landscape, and a lot of like native grasses like Stipropulchra and stuff. Just a really cool place. And I suspect that Northridge looked a lot like this back in the day. So I spent approximately 5 hours there. I collected 18 different native plant species, and and my colleague as well that joined me, we made about 30 observations on iNaturalist and CalFlora. One of the plants that we were allowed to collect was an endangered species. This is Davidson's Bushmallow, Malacothamnus davidsonii. So what our hope is that we can propagate this with some help from some professional nursery managers and stuff. And we can give this to students that live local to Northridge, right? This is a plant that probably once, when there's less development, had a wider distribution. And a lot of that has been affected by urbanization. So our hope is that we could get Davidson Bushmallow into more yards around Northridge. And this is a really cool plant. It lives about four to 6 years or whatever. It's really prolific. It creates a lot of flowers that are super pretty. It attracts a ton of insects and a ton of pollinators. I've seen these like covered in beetles that are like eating the flowers and stuff. And just a really cool, neat plant that's like local to Northridge and unfortunately endangered. So here's kind of what we'd do. We'd find, this is a tarragon plant, type of Artemisia. And so we'd make an iNaturalist observation, and then we'd collect seeds after that. And this is like what I'll be including into the report to the Army Corps of Engineers. Another plant that I really like that we observed was deerweed. This is Acmespon glauber, another species that's like taxonomically in flux constantly. I really love it. To me, it indicates coastal sage scrub, and there was just thick stands of this, like deerweed as far as the eye could see, and I was just in love. And so we collected a lot of this. And this is like late in the year for it to still be flowering, which is just super funky and weird. And so I'm hoping that's like a local adaptation to ephemeral availability of water. It just made me happy. One cool trivia thing about this is the flowers will go from yellow to red if they're pollinated, as kind of a signal to pollinators, like, hey, don't worry, like, we got this. I love it. It's a nifty plant. Here's another plant that we found. I didn't collect samples of this, but I did record it on iNaturalist. I've never seen this plant before. A lot of my botanizing has been in the Great Basin and the Santa Monica Mountains. And it's not as common in those areas, but this is Lysingea glandulifera. Glandulifera, yeah. The valley Lysingea. It's like a vinegar weed kind of plant. It smells really strong. It likes growing in these like kind of ephemeral washes. Super pretty, super glandular, super sticky. It was like about 10 centimeters tall, so not like super big. Love it. Super gorgeous. Okay, so I talked about like those kind of like results and methods all kind of tied into one. Let's do some discussion. So if you go on CalScape, which is a fantastic website, by the way, if you just type in our area code for zip code, area code, whatever. If you just type in 91325 of the address for Cal State Northridge onto CalScape, you get about 395 plants show up as native, right? And they're like, you could like argue they're native or not native. This is just what the algorithm's throwing up. But a lot of these plants, like even if they're like more native to the San Gabriel Mountains, or they're more native to the Santa Susana Mountains, or maybe they're like very much native to the basin in the San Fernando Valley, there's a lot of them, right? And a lot of these plants are grown in nurseries, and a lot of these plants do well in yards, right? A yard is totally different than a natural setting, right? We can't go back to those days of grizzly bears and pronghorn antelope. That'd be wonderful, but unfortunately, our landscapes are a lot different. So you kind of have to work with what you got, right? So you have to know how much shade you have in your backyard. It would help if you know or kind of understand what type of soil you have in your yard as well. And then what you want to attract, right? Do you want to attract butterflies? Do you want to attract birds? And this website can really help and be, or maybe you want to go like water-wise and do like almost no added water whatsoever. This website's great and can help you out there. When anyone wants to know what plants they should plant in their area, I always throw this URL out there because it's just super helpful. And they have an advanced search option, which is very useful. Okay, so here's Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Reserve checklist for birds, right? Why am I talking about this? So the Sepulveda Basin's pretty close to Cal State Northridge. And by the way, it's, I think it's like 134 species, which is a lot. So the Sepulveda Basin is this other wildlife area. Here's in the corner, you can see the Hansen Dam. And then towards the bottom, you can see the Sepulveda Basin. And then kind of like on the other side of the triangle, the other corner of the triangle would be Cal State Northridge, right? In the Sepulveda Basin, it has an interesting history, right? There were like parts that were unmanaged for a long time. And then Army Corps of Engineers came in and, bulldozing stuff and building stuff. And big sections of it were turned into parks. And there's a lot of plants that were planted in there. So it has it has a long history of human management. But the restoration efforts have been going on for decades, and there's some great oak woodlands there. There's really cool like wetland habitat there, and it attracts a ton of birds, right? And this is kind of like a model for urbanization of what urban wildlands can look like, right? We can do this in our own backyard, just like the Sepulveda Basin did. They had more money and they had more resources, but some of us have backyards, some of us have balconies, and we could do a little bit of what they did in their 140 something bird species that have attracted there. We can do that in our backyards with native plants. So there's this ecologist, super cool, who has this idea, right? And it's not novel, but like this could be the next great national park in the United States of America, is where we all just kind of dedicate a few feet of our backyards to native plants. And we can attract a ton of birds, insects, butterflies, reptiles, amphibians by doing that. And this person's in like Pennsylvania and they're trying to get people to plant natives out there. So we got more plants than they do in Pennsylvania. And I think it'd be a lot easier, a lot more fun for us to do it than it would be there. But I am really excited to see this kind of stuff hit the mainstream as well. So you're wondering, like, I want to do this, but I have no idea how to get started. So there's groups like the California Native Plant Society, and they have these like in pre-COVID times, post-COVID time, it's a little more like this kind of interface, like webinars and stuff. But they have ambassadors where you can go to their yards and you can see how they're doing native plant gardens and how like the animals they're attracting and the colors and the fluctuations in seasons. Like one of my favorite things about Southern California is the fall for coastal sage scrub and chaparral. It gets this like really rich brown, like dark red, dark green kind of color, and it's just so unique, right? Everyone wants like constant popping flowers, but like, a lot of our plants are drought deciduous. And so if you go to like these native ambassador gardens, you can kind of see those like California seasons right before your eyes. And then you could like even, get your neighbors involved with having signs that say like native plants live here. And so you can explain to your neighbors, hey, it's not unkempt, it's like a carefully curated habitat space for animals. I don't know, but you can like also kind of like do a little upkeep as well. It depends on the native plant that you're growing, but how do we do this right? So we have this opportunity to plant more native plants in our yards. How do we make sure we're not doing this wrong? Because throughout a lot of history in America has been wrong, and it's really disenfranchised a lot of people. So we should make native plants affordable. So this shouldn't be a class issue where and it kind of is already, right? We find more biodiversity, especially of species richness of birds in high-class neighborhoods in Los Angeles. In lower-class neighborhoods, we typically find less diversity of birds, in middle class as well. And this social inequality it's obviously not fair. And so part of what we can do as native plant activists is make sure from the get-go that native plants are affordable for everyone, or as close to as possible, right? They should be accessible for everyone. So when you're doing a native plant event, like keep in mind people with disabilities, right? Keep in mind people that might not have a car to access your event. Native plants should be for everyone. They shouldn't just be for the few. So even if like me, like I live in a really small studio apartment, I don't have a backyard, I don't have a balcony, but I'm involved with the Institute for Sustainability, where I used to volunteer more in their food garden and stuff, but these kind of public urban gardens can be really important for people that are lower income that don't have access to places where they can plant native plants, right? Native plants should also be democratic, right? We should get everyone's intake into what's important for native plants because they're ours, right? We share in them. And so this process shouldn't be like just scientists telling lay people what to do. This should be a conversation, right? And this is going to be a little more controversial, but I think we need to be anthropocentric for the disenfranchised. And so what I mean by that is it's really easy to get stuck in these conversations of why native plants are important for animals and for the plants themselves. I think that also doesn't include people of color into the conversation as well. So when we're talking about native plants, I think it's so important that we do kind of take a human tilt to them and we not make native plants like more important than people. Because typically what that sounds like is like this kind of colonial rhetoric of like plants are more important than people. And like that's just simply not true. So we need to incorporate all sorts of people into these conversations about native plants, and they need to benefit all sorts of people as well. Like there should never be someone thrown out of housing for native plants, right? And there shouldn't be anyone robbed of a meal because of native plants. We can kind of like do this correctly by looking at this from a social justice angle as well. And I implore everyone to do that and to not scoff this off as like, oh, that's such a liberal tilt. Like, no, this is really important that we do this right to help everyone. Part of how we could do that is by incorporating native plants that are edible into the landscape. So I talked about Sambucus elderberry earlier. When processed properly, like elderberry can be a great edible native plant. And there's like a lot of edible plants that are really great that have been like used in indigenous nations for thousands of years. And as long as we like source our knowledge and we like don't poison people and we properly have these plants, right? Like we could help feed people, and this could like lower food insecurity in food deserts. And like, along those kind of same that same conversation is like listening to indigenous voices, right? And sourcing indigenous knowledge when presented with it. Like a lot of California botanists have benefited from indigenous peoples, but have neglected to acknowledge that, right? So if we're going to do this right, and with the California native plant movement, we have to incorporate indigenous voices into the conversation, and they have to drive it, frankly. And then finally, I really think we just need to look at the spaces for what they are now, and not what the plants that we think belong there, but like what's already there, right? So like, here's like a cool shrub I like, California bricklebush. But this is like a plant, I think I found this in Thousand Oaks, right? But like, it's like last on the thought of anyone doing restoration is this bricklebush. It kind of like, I like it, it's water smart, and it has these like neat, cool aster kind of flowers. It's not spectacular, it's not like a penstemon or anything, but if we just look at the lands, look what's already there, look what we have records of in herbariums and stuff, dried specimens. We listen to the land. Go to those abandoned lots. Look for native plants that are already there. Don't reinvent the wheel. If there's locally adapted genotypes already on the landscape. Make use of them. Don't like put your image of what the landscape should be on the landscape. Okay, so conclusions. Here's Arroyo lupin, Lupinus succulentus behind me. I really love this plant. This is Cal State Northridge. This is like, I love this. This is just like just on the other side of Lassen and Zelza. And I think it's all gone now. But I'm sure the seeds might still be in the seed bank, but folks see native plants, they don't think about it, and they destroy them. So that's unfortunately how I feel. So what are some of my closing thoughts about this, right? Community science. Apps like iNaturalist and CalFlora are super important. And I really think a lot of us need to be incorporating them into how we look at and learn about plants. Even folks that aren't scientists, even more so folks that aren't scientists, need to be utilizing these sorts of applications and observing the natural world around them, contributing to community science. And so a lot of this needs to be, and like scientists and people with native plant knowledge need to be a part of the conversation in such a way that we're teaching folks what and how to plant and what they're looking at as well. And not being condescending about it, but in such a way that we're facilitating like positive action and positive conversations, right? Like if someone's like illegally foraging endangered species, like take that as an opportunity to educate someone in a positive way instead of making an enemy. We could be having a conversation about how you can get involved in a nonprofit, you can get involved in a state or a national park and restoring landscapes controlled by experts, right, that are doing this, instead of like guerrilla warriors that are running around like thinking they know more than experts. I just really think that we can be fostering like a really positive educational space in native plants. Finally, I think we need to build public refugia for plants, animals, and people as well. And people is like a really big thing there, because these urban spaces, they have people like it or not, right? And typically in urban environments, these tend to be really diverse communities of people. So when we're talking about native plant restoration, a lot of the conversation that needs to go into it as well is like, how are these landscapes going to be utilized by people as well? Like people that are either recreationally using a park for hiking or maybe mountain biking, or like our homeless neighbors too. Like, can they possibly eat off of any of these native plants that we're providing for the landscape to lower food insecurity in the community? We need to prioritize who and what is already here. So when you're talking about native plants, I think it's really critical that we look on the landscape and see what plants are already here and not try to reinvent the wheel. And I'm going to end this talk with one of my favorite botanists. This is Lester Roundtree. And this is kind of her relationship with plants. I really like it. I inhabit my hillside only from November to February, while the winter storms are blowing and the winter rains pouring. In March and April, I have long shining days on the desert, and in May, happy wakes in the foothills, where a chorus of robins wakes me, and my morning bath is in a rushing stream of just melted snow. In June, I am in the northern counties, scented with new mown hay and wild strawberries. In July, in the higher mountains, and in August and September, up in the alpine zone with Mueller Bureau. She had this cool relationship with native plants where like she'd do her thing for like the winter months, like she said, but then the rest of the months she was just exploring by herself, looking for native plants. And she had such like a landscaping, gardening perspective to native plants too. And she just really wanted to spread the beauty of California to the entire world. Well, Lester lived a very long life, but I'm here to tell you, Lester, that I found plants in November. And even though we don't have rain and it was abnormally hot this last weekend, we still have beautiful plants that are blooming and still have opportunities for folks that love nature to see that even in the city. So whether we're at like what's perceived to be the wilderness or urban centers, you can find beauty wherever you look. And so now I'll open the floor to questions. Thank you so much. Okay, cool. It looks like we have a lot of questions. So my wife and I work at the CSUN chemistry department. Mike and I are in the sustainability committee for the Northwood East Neighborhood Council, which encompasses CSUN. We'd love to partner with you and have an educational session for community members on native trees and other plants in the San Fernando Valley. Please email me. Let's teach the community what native species and what they can do to bring biodiversity. Oh, I'm really flattered. That would be really cool. I would love to have that opportunity to talk with y'all.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, Nat, what's up?
Thank you so much for this awesome presentation, as always. I think we got a question. I don't know if you see the Q&A there. It says from Wemp, who says, does CalFlora database specify which plant is native to the local environment and which one it isn't?
So what we can do with CalFlora, so CalFlora is this, it's kind of like iNaturalist in a way where it collects herbarium specimens and iNaturalist observations, and people can just plug into CalFlora too. And so CalFlora is this compendium of knowledge of where plants fit in California. And this includes non-native and native plants as well. So you can find a lot of invasive species on CalFlora. And if you find an invasive species, it's really important that you put it on CalFlora too, so we can learn about new occurrences of invasive species. But so like recently I saw a colleague on Instagram, she posted Davidson's Bushmallow, and she marked it as Lake Elsinore. And I messaged her, I was like, oh my gosh, that'd be such a big deal if you found Davidson's Bushmallow at Lake Elsinore. But she's like, oh no, I need to put this on CalFlora, but like it wasn't Lake Elsinore, it was somewhere else. So that's like, it's like Lake Elsinore and like the San Gabriel Mountains and stuff. They're like far, but not that far, right? But like there is a difference in these kind of different mountain ranges and communities and stuff. And CalFlora typically reflects that. They do try to obscure like endangered species, so you can't go poaching like a Dudleya, like that you want to go find. So they'll obscure like exact locations, but typically CalFlora is a really good source of what's local to that area, right? So the CalScape showed 200 and something species in Northridge. You could then kind of whittle that list down utilizing CalFlora, or just talk to a botanist like myself, and we can kind of like discuss what sort of soil conditions you have and like environmental conditions to figure out exactly what's like really native to that area. But yeah, I wouldn't, in urban landscaping, I wouldn't worry about it too much, but that's just my opinion. And then Bella had a question, not a very scientific, but just out of curiosity, do you have an all-time favorite plant, or is it too? I love sagebrush. I love Artemisia tridentata. It was one of the first plants I ever worked with. I did dendrochronology on them. They're really easy to decipher tree rings, and surprisingly, it's a shrub. It's super beautiful. I call it cowboy cologne. Same with Artemisia californica. It just has this really rich, chemically kind of like smell that I just wish filled my apartment at all times. I love it. I also like all the mariposa lilies. They're super attractive and beautiful. I like bush lupins. It is really hard to pick just one. Are there any apps you would recommend to help identify the plants we have? So Sherry, I think like iNaturalist is probably the best algorithm-based app, but so like in Los Angeles, there's the Santa Monica Mountains Wildflower app, and it's also a website too. So it's smmwildflowers.org, or it's smmflowers.org or something like that. But that I think is even better than iNaturalist in Los Angeles, because it really gets you to like learn how to use dichotomous keys, which are kind of like follow your own adventures, right? To figure out what the identity of a plant is. But it also has great pictures, it has great descriptions, it has a glossary to teach you botanical terms, because that can be a little overwhelming for folks. I just really love it. So yeah, and there's a few other wildflower apps that I do like. Like there's one that's like Southern California wildflowers, Northern California wildflowers, and they utilize a lot from the Illinois Wildflower Guide, but they're still pretty good. And they include like range data in them as well. I also use the Nevada Wildflower app as well. Of course, like Northern California and Nevada would be more relevant to those areas. But I also always suggest that folks, if you want to get into native plants, if you want to get into plants in general, think about getting the PDF for the Jepson manual. And if you can't buy it, there's ways to get it because the price can be a bit prohibitive. But the Jepson manual is, especially the PDF and the ebook, that is the definitive guide to plants in California. It's really what the experts use. It'll make your botany skills from 0 to 100. Like the Jepson manual is just, it's great. And I really implore anyone that's interested in learning more about plants to dive into it and just go wild, become an expert. Karen had a question. Are there any programs supplemented by the city, county, or state to encourage aid people to plant native species on their property? Oh, that is a great question. I don't know. I know folks that live like by wildlands and like folks that like have riparian habitat. Wetlands is what I meant to say. Wetlands and riparian habitat. There's certain grants by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife that you can apply for. If your backyard has like habitat for cactus wrens, so if you can attach your backyard or your like microhabitat to some sort of endangered animal like desert tortoises, there's typically grants available for that. So another example is like the greater sage grouse. Sage grouse are like this super contentious bird that lives in the northeastern part of the state. And if you have suitable sage grouse habitat, the government will pay you a conservation easement that you can take care of sage grouse on your property, right? So to help pay you to preserve habitat. Now, does Los Angeles City do anything like that in urban areas? I kind of doubt it, but you could get rebates for turning your lawn into California native plants or water smart plants as well. So that's a great question. I should really look into that, but that's kind of like outside my realm of expertise.
Well, Richard, it doesn't seem like there's much outside of your realm.
No, I'm like not that smart, but thank you.
Well, just in case you missed Helen's chat there, she says it's amazing to have you on our team, and you are so knowledgeable.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you, Helen.
I echo her.
Yeah, this is great. Y'all have been really wonderful. Ryan has a question. What would be the downsides of planting something like Washingtonia filifera far outside its natural range, like an arid NorCal flood forest? So Washingtonia is a palm tree. This is like the Mexican fan palm, I believe, right? There's like the California fan palm and the Mexican fan palm. I note Mexican fan palm wherever I see it, not the adult trees, because I'm assuming those were planted by people. I note the babies, and I find a lot of them, especially in disturbed locations. So it's hard to say, right? Like in Northern California, palm trees probably haven't been there for thousands of years, but now they're there. Palm trees are spreading the range of the hooded oriole. That's one effect. I don't know if that's positive or negative or what. Hooded orioles really love palm trees. So the roots of palm trees kind of get into everything, and they change water flow. They can remove water sources from native plants. Like my biggest issue with palm trees where they don't belong is that they're altering the animals that have adapted into those locations. They're altering the adaptations of the plants that have evolved in those locations, right? They're creating a new set of factors for all those organisms to contend with. So there's positives, there's negatives. I don't think any non-native species is positive in its effect into a landscape. I think the effects of a non-native species on a landscape are neutral or negative at worst. So when you have fan palms in these riparian areas where we normally have willow, is that taking away habitat from California gnatcatchers? I wonder that. Is that now allowing more bats and rats into the landscape. Bats I see is normally a net positive, but you're just now creating different types of habitat for different animals that have different cascading effects on everything else as well. And you could be affecting plants as well with like nutrient distribution and water distributions. So I don't know the easy answer to that. If someone were to ask me, keep the palm tree or kill the palm tree, I'd probably say kill the palm tree and plant something else. But I could also see an argument for leaving it and just like, you know, so it's complex and there's no easy answers. I think it warrants discussion, definitely. Out of all the invasive non-native plant species, which one is the most deadly to a specific native species here in California? Oh boy, I don't know. That's a really hard question to answer too. I think Brassica nigra is probably up there. Brassica nigra was, there's this myth that it was, you know, all the Spaniards planted it during colonization of California, and they'd go from one mission to the next planting it. They probably did to some degree, and they ate the seeds and the foliage and stuff. I also think that the U.S. government and land managers in the 1900s in California, in the 50s and 60s and stuff, I think they were intentionally spreading Brassica nigra, black mustard, on the hillsides post-burn, because they don't understand fire recovery and they don't understand plants can come back after wildfires. Coastal sage scrub will come back post-fire. It just takes time, right? And these land managers wanted to prevent erosion so they could protect their precious housing developments. And they wanted to prevent landslides, so they thought that like Brassica nigra would help, which it doesn't. It's not very good at soil stabilization. And it just has destroyed so much coastal sage scrub habitat, black mustard. I would put that up there for one of the worst invasives, but there's almost nothing we can do about it now. It's so ubiquitous in Southern California. There's some species that we could do something about, right? We probably could stop giant reed in Southern California. We can get pretty close to it. There's a lot of Arundodonax everywhere, like, and I saw at the Hanson Dam, but we could probably get a dent into it. We would probably do something about tree tobacco. It's not too late. I see tree tobacco in a lot of places. And that's really devastating to chaparral. It might be too late for tumbleweed. I don't know where I don't see tumbleweed. Salsola tragus, or whatever species it is. That's still to be figured out genomically. But, you know, we do the best we can. And some battles will win and some will lose, and we'll have to figure out what the new normal is. And the plants and animals will adapt. It'll take a lot of time, though.
Wow. Well, Richard, I think we've come to the hour. Time always flies with you.
No, thank you. I really love doing this. I'm my most happy when I'm talking about plants.
Oh,
so
well,
I really enjoy this.
We see that, and you know, I've seen you do this. This is like probably my 4th or 5th time, and I always learn something new. And we're looking forward to more of them for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And then I hope to hear from the folks from the Northridge neighborhood.
Yeah, we'll definitely reach out to them. We'll have a conversation. We'll follow up. We'll shoot an email, and then I copied down the email, so we can initiate an email, and I'll pass along the email.
Yeah, that'd be really exciting. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful day.
All right. You too. Thanks, Richard. Bye, everybody.